G'day and welcome to Perko's podcast, a podcast all about strategy, leadership and soul care. We're here to help you obtain your personal, professional and spiritual goals without losing your soul. We hope that today's episode is refreshing and gives you a new perspective. Now here's your host, Jason Perkins.
G'day everyone and welcome to episode 30, part 1 of Perko's podcast. It is great to be back with you today. If you are just jumping into the podcast, make sure you go back and listen to the last episode with my friend John Finkeld. John had so much great content around leadership, recruiting team members, and even just encouraging us that we don't have to get everything done by a certain age. We give ourselves these false deadlines, and like John, I hope that I am doing what I love well into my 80s. John's episode is episode 29 of the podcast, if you want to go back and listen to that conversation. Before I get into today's episode, I know that we are approaching the Christmas season and soul care during the holidays is something that I love talking to people about, and I'm oftentimes asked about it frequently during this season. I'm so passionate about it because the entire reason we celebrate Christmas is because God came to be with us through a baby born in a manger. Not only did he come into the world, but he came into your world and my world, and he longs to be with us. Soul care is all about being with Jesus, and Christmas is a great season to talk about just that. My good friend Duncan Banks is going to take over Perko's podcast for the day as a guest host, and he is going to ask me some questions about how to care for your soul during the holidays. I hope that this conversation will help you to engage with people well in a season that, quite frankly, can be somewhat difficult. That episode will be coming out the week of Christmas, so keep your eyes and ears out for that one. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Brian Heasley. I love this conversation with Brian today because it gives me so much hope. I've struggled over the years of my journey with Jesus to find consistent quality time to be with Jesus, and I have so oftentimes felt guilty for that. Brian is not only a helpful guide in this conversation of how to spend time with Jesus, but he also relieved me of the shame and guilt I have oftentimes felt because of my failure. Brian serves as 24/7 Prayer's International Prayer Director, traveling extensively around the globe, inspiring and teaching on prayer and mission. He is a global ambassador for Thy Kingdom Come, an initiative of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is also a trustee of Christian Solidarity Worldwide, a charity working in the area of freedom of religious belief. Brian and his wife Tracy are long-term trailblazers within the 24/7 prayer movement with years of experience in local church and pioneer missions. They pioneered the work of 24/7 prayer in the party area of Ibiza, Spain, where they lived for 8 years, developing rhythms of prayer and mission, and with a heart to bring about change in a place the British press once described as Sodom and Gomorrah. They are passionate about prayer, mission, and justice, with a real heart for leading in a way that is both sustainable and life-giving, rooted in a rhythm of devotional and prayerful responsiveness. They have been married for 27 years and have 2 adult sons. I so hope you enjoy this conversation with my new friend, Brian Heasley. Brian, welcome to Perko's podcast, all the way from Great Britain. How are you doing today, mate? It's so good to see you.
Hey, Jason. Yeah, I'm doing well now that I've got a coffee. A little bit early here, but I'm all good. It's nice to be here, and it's lovely to see you. Looking forward to spending some time having a conversation with you. So, yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. I am super stoked to dive into some questions about a brand new book that you've just released called Be Still, A Simple Guide to Quiet Times. But before we get into that, I want to ask you a list of questions. These are my top 10 either or questions that I love asking my guests to help us get to know a little bit about the person behind the podcast. So I'm going to ask you these questions. Just tell us the first thing that comes to your mind, mate. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
You're a coffee. Would you call yourself, Brian, a coffee snob? Are you a bit of a
No, I'm a caffeine addict.
Okay, but not a coffee snob.
I'll drink crap coffee, but I love a really good coffee.
Okay.
Love a, but I'll drink anything really. It's got caffeine in it.
Yeah. Apple or PC?
Apple.
Okay. Beaches or mountains?
Beaches.
Okay. Dogs or cats?
Dogs. Definitely
Okay.
dogs.
Definitely dogs. Okay. I like the fact.
I'm allergic to cats.
Are you really? Do you guys have a dog in your home?
We did, but he died.
Oh no.
Don't worry. He was old. Sorry, don't want to
Okay.
laugh. Didn't need it. I mean, he died of old age. So
Okay.
we're good. It was very, very sad, but yeah.
He had a great life. That's good to know.
That was it.
Netflix or YouTube, mate?
Netflix.
Okay. Favorite show right now on Netflix? Have you got one that you're kind of really into?
Yeah, I'm enjoying Narcos.
Okay.
But I'm not, I speak a bit of Spanish, so I tell my wife I'm watching it to help my Spanish.
Okay. I like that. That's good. Are you a call or a text guy?
I would prefer a call to a text.
Yeah, over a text. Yeah, very good. Podcast or music when you're listening?
Music, sorry.
Oh, bummer. I know. Passenger or driver?
Driver, which probably shows I have some sort of control issues. You're like psychologically analyzing me right now. You say these are like 10 simple questions. You're like getting a whole read on me. I can sense it.
It is exactly. Are you a saver or a spender?
A spender.
Okay. Is your wife a saver?
Yeah, my wife's an accountant.
Okay, so you guys balance each other out.
Yeah, I mean we've been married 30 years next year, so we're still working on the tension between one being a saver and being a spender. But I think we've found a happy place.
Okay, so good news for everyone listening. If you have that same tension in your marriage, it only takes about 30 years to find a happy place. It's not a long road. It's a short one.
And even then, there's a few flare-ups along the way. So.
I bet there is. Well, listen, mate, the most important soul care leadership question of all time is this one. Toilet paper roll. Is it over or under when you hang a toilet paper roll?
Do you know, when I don't know. I don't even think about it. I just
You
put
don't?
it on.
You just put it.
Yeah, there's no. I don't think we're over or under. It just put the toilet roll on the holder,
and it doesn't matter.
I don't think it really does it?
Brian, I don't think you're aware of this, but there is a group of people in the world that this is a major point of contention for some people. Of all the things to be divided over, toilet roll holders is probably the least of our worries. That's for sure.
I'm not going to assume a position on that. I'm going to stay on the fence.
Okay, I like that. Staying on the fence with the toilet roll holder. Hey, listen, in the introduction to your book, Brian, you talk about the fact that you had a real spiritual heritage in your childhood. In fact, it sounded as though, your childhood growing up had a lot of a Christian influence in it, but it seems like, and you didn't go into huge detail, but enough to say that you wrote about going to prison when you were a teenager. It seems like things went off the rails a little bit. Would you mind just kind of unpacking your journey spiritually a little bit for us and sharing with the listeners? Yeah, that'd be great.
I mean, I grew up in a beautiful Christian home. Both my parents are Christians. My father is a Baptist minister. We moved to England from Ireland. So okay. I'm from Northern Ireland. So I'm from Belfast in Ireland. So we grew up there, and we moved over when I was about 8 to England. And my mother passed away of ovarian cancer when I was 11.
Wow.
My dad there was 4 boys, and he was a very typical, and he still is a very typical Northern Irish man who had never been in a kitchen in his life, and never, so there's quite a lot of, it was quite a shock. And then 4 boys, so I think for the next, and that was the year I was starting high school. So I was just starting high school. So I think during my high school years, I really battled with 2 worlds. Okay. I had a kind of Christian faith, and I had my kind of friends at school who I seemed to gravitate towards all the other dysfunctional guys who had broken lives, because mine was broken too.
Sure.
And then as we got older, we into our late teens, my brothers and I went along to a charismatic church in just outside London. and we were loving it. Lots of girls, Holy Spirit. Sorry, I should have said Holy Spirit first, not lots of girls. But, all that kind of stuff.
You're teenagers. You're being honest. That's what it was that drew you. Yeah.
Well, because we were in a Baptist church, and then one day went along to this charismatic church. And this is not slight on any Baptist, by the way, but it was back then. Yeah. It was like 27 old ladies and my dad, and then literally widows. And then all of a sudden, boom, we got this charismatic. And there's like 29 young ladies, and you're like, oh my goodness. So it worked for us. Had a real encounter with the Holy Spirit. Real lot of prophetic stuff released over our lives. But at the same time, I was still hanging out with this group of friends who, and I'm not blaming them, I'm just saying that's who we were hanging out with. And so I got into this kind of into a kind of drugs thing where we were smoking a lot of weed, amphetamine, all that kind of stuff, trying to sell it. We weren't particularly good at that kind of stuff. And then I ended up, I became homeless, lived in a car for a while. Had 4 little short spells in prison, but they were on, I don't know how you guys do it in Australia, but on remand. So I didn't serve a sentence in prison. So I was remanded in there. And then when I was 20, I was sitting in a probation hostel in a town called Ipswich here in Suffolk, and I was just reading. Someone had given me a Bible. I don't know why. Someone gave me this Bible, and I was sitting on the end of my bed. I'd had a really rough time. It was in the morning. I remember it, and I remember saying, "God, if you are real, save me." The thing is, right, Jason, I always thought I was saved. So it wasn't like, because I gave my life to Jesus in Castlereagh Baptist Church, Belfast, when I was 5 years old. So I always thought, right, I'm in, I'm saved. But I knew that my life wasn't matching up to that decision. And I was going through this battle of light and dark, these two lives that we live. And I think by that point, the dark side was winning, as it were. And I've been trying. I loved God. I wanted to follow him, but I kept getting sucked into smoking weed and hanging out with these guys who provided me with a sense of community. I hadn't dealt with my anger. There was all sorts of things going on. And so I was just an absolute mixture and mess of that. So, and then I just said, God, if you are real, save me from this. Save me from sitting on the end of my bed in a probation hostel, feeling bad because I took a load of acid the day before, and friendless, penniless, homeless. Save me from this. And so I had this Bible, so I dropped it open, which I know they say never do that because you can always end up on like, don't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk, things like that. But anyway, I dropped it open and I started to read, and it's Isaiah 59 verse 1 that says, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor is his ear too dull to hear.
Wow.
And I just broke, literally. I remember sitting on the end of the bed, just thinking, wow, his arm is not too short to save, nor is his ear too dull to hear. He can save me, and he has heard me. So I think at that moment was when I had a real incredibly divine encounter. And it's probably at that point where I really started to believe in an interventionist God, but I also started to believe in a God who hears. So I think that was probably where my passion for prayer was born. But also my passion for a God who will break into broken situations. That was born in that moment. It took me about 6 months to kind of deal with, not just, I'm 30 and I'm 30 years into this journey, or just over 31 years into this journey as a Christian, and there's still issues that pop up around my mother's death, or all that sort of stuff. It's weird, isn't it? But I got it. What happened, the best thing that ever happened to me was a friend of mine was living where I'm now, in this town now, and he said, why don't you come and live with my family? And so straight from this probation hostel, I moved. He's a Christian, he used to be my youth worker. And I moved in with him and his family, and they just helped me to reassimilate. And I became part of a church that within a year I was the children's worker.
Wow.
And, which is crazy. So I really believe, I think as well, Jason, in the redemptive power of community. So being brought into the body of Christ, and being cared for and being loved and being looked after and just being talked to, just just helped me so much. It kind of worries me even right now, when you think about like all the middle class people who've been during lockdown. I thought, I don't need to go to church anymore.
Yeah.
Because I can watch the really good
Online.
sermon, I can listen to really good music.
Yeah.
But I think they forgot about the fact that there'll be a 20-year-old me in church.
Yeah.
And it's not, church isn't about consuming, church is about serving.
Yes.
And so the best thing you could ever do is go to church and sit next to a 20-year-old me and show me how to do life and talk to me and befriend me. You can't do that on a screen. So the minute people are starting to go, hang on, I'm going to watch, I'm just going to watch church, I'm not going to go to church, you've become a consumer, not a congregant, not a member of your church, So I was really blessed by actual physical people in the room who taught me how to be normal, how to love God. I looked and saw them worship. I saw the tears in their eyes. I saw the devotion on their faces. Just surrounded by all sorts of weird, wonderful, and wacky Christians. But it was that community that discipled me and brought me through. And so I guess as well, Jason, then in that was when I really decided, Brian, if you're going to do this, you've got to get your life together in terms of like, you've got to read the Bible. If you say you're a Christian, you've got to read the Bible. You've got to pray. So I think it was probably there where I started with the kind of quiet time aspect of my life, something that had always been modeled to me by my father. But I thought, so I just assumed, I think it's kind of weird really. The minute I gave my life back to Jesus, there's two things I thought you'd do. One was you should tithe. I don't know why. They just started tithing straight away. And then you should have a quiet time. And looking back, I think it's because my dad was always really big on those
two things.
Well, not just those two things, but I always just associated those with faith. So
Spoken like a true Baptist, Brian. Make sure that you're giving and make sure you're doing your quiet time, which, by the way, my dad too is actually a Baptist pastor, and I grew up in that type of setting. And man, quiet time was very much a part of kind of the vernacular of what was talked about as a kid for me growing up. How would you describe it to somebody, Brian, who's maybe brand new to the whole concept of Christianity and following Jesus? What does it mean to have a quiet time? How would you summarize that?
It's quite interesting. I think in John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he mentions a quiet time.
He does,
he says, I'm going to be back in the morning with my coffee and my Bible, having a quiet time. And I was like, I think there's a reclamation of a quiet time. So for me, a quiet time is a set aside time to spend communicating with God. It works best for me in the morning, but for other people it can be other times. I think that set aside time involves the Bible, prayer, and listening. And because I think if it's just listing, that's not great. Listening is kind of important. So it's basically a time of day that I set aside on a regular basis to speak to listen to read the Bible, to journal with God. And it's just me and him.
You talk about this kind of a reclamation of quiet times. I have done a lot of reading over the years of what I would call great people of faith, kind of the heroes of faith, people that were maybe missionaries or maybe, priests in centuries past or monks. And I've noticed, Brian, a trend or a pattern in all of their lives where they had this set aside time to just be in relationship with Jesus or be in relationship with God throughout the day. You know what I've noticed though, Brian, and I'm not saying that this is formulaic the way it has to be done, but I've noticed that many of them, if not all of them, they did it at a ridiculously ungodly hour of the morning. Many times they were early risers. And I'm not saying that's when it has to happen, but it's almost like they were so wanting to prioritize this thing before they got on with the rest of their day that it just seems like that was a unique pattern or trend in many of their lives. Have you noticed the same thing when you've read church history and people of faith?
Yeah, I think at probably different times, different ways, but I think most of them are inspired by Mark, the book of Mark, where Jesus gets up early in the morning. So I think, and it says, and he goes, takes himself off to a solitary place and prays. So all of the heroes of the faith are probably inspired by Christ himself, who did that, But I think, and so that's where it's crept in. It's a morning thing, and a lot of, I have so much to, you hear those old ones, I had so much to do today, I had to pray for 3 hours. Like, oh my goodness, 3 hours, and I think now this isn't an excuse, but I do think there was a culture of when the sun went down, people went to sleep.
Yes.
The sun goes down, so here I am in England, the sun's going down at 4:30 in the afternoon, but I still go to bed 11 o'clock.
Right.
So I think there's I'm not saying that wasn't really holy, that they got up and prayed for hours, but I do think there's culturally now. I would imagine most people I know that struggle to get up early to pray, probably it's not the getting up early, it's going to bed
early.
So,
Absolutely.
I get sucked into so much at night. Like, so here in England, we have like the 10 o'clock news. I watch the 10 o'clock news. And then like some nonsense comes on after it, like police camera chase, and I've just spent like an hour watching people chase car thieves up and down the motorway. And you think, what is, and you're an hour later to bed. So I think I try and get myself a bit disciplined about going to that. But I think as well, what people forget is there are moments where it says Jesus dismissed his disciples and he went up a mountain and prayed. That wasn't in the morning.
Right.
Because they'd spent the day. You've got to think that was the end of the feeding of the 5,000. So that was in the evening. So there is, I don't think there's a biblical pattern for a set time. Actually, and we may talk about this, but when Adam and Eve walked in the garden in the cool of the day, the Ellicott, I think it is, talks about the fact that the cool of the day was the time when all the work was done. So there was that sort of, Adam and Eve walked after they'd done their work day. So it's just it's worked in. I think it worked in times for other people, but I wouldn't worry about being time specific. And I actually think, but I do think that it's the carving out of a space and a place, regular time. So I have a friend who he was doing a long commute, so he turned his car. He calls it, my car is my sanctuary. Actually, thinking, I was talking to his wife. I wrote that in the book, but really, I was talking to his wife the other day. He called it his tabernacle. Which so the first time he met his girlfriend, this girlfriend, who's now his wife, and they've got 2 kids, he opened his car door and he went, "Welcome to my tabernacle," which freaked her out a little bit. But they're still together. So he turned his car into his place of prayer. There are others who, like I talk about the gym, turning the gym in, because everyone's got their earbuds in, haven't they, listening to like Eminem to get themselves all pumped, but like, or whatever, I don't know what you listen to, but turning that into a place of prayer. So I you're doing a bench press. I've got 2 sons, and I hold one of them in this hand and one of them in that hand, and I lift them up before the Lord. And so you can turn sort of moments of your day into a quiet time. People like, we were just talking about my dog, which sadly passed away. I had loads of great quiet times walking my dog. So I think it's just being creative. Like, and if you're a young mum or a young dad, sorry, I'm not being gender specific there, it's a nightmare to get up in the morning. When we had kids, if I had got up in the morning and said, "Tracy, I'm going to sit in the corner there for an hour and a half, read my Bible and pray," while she charged around after a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, it'd have like gone bananas. So there's seasons for it. A friend of mine, what she started to do was, whilst the kettle was boiling, she decided that she would stand still and let the kettle boil, and whilst it boiled, she'd pray. And so different seasons, different times, but I think it is being intentional, building intentional habits. Rhythm, have a rhythm of prayer. Rhythm is a lovely word for me.
I love that. What would you say, Brian, to someone who maybe grew up with this idea of quiet time being a little bit rigid, like you must do it in the morning or you must do it for a certain amount of time? In fact, I had a friend of mine, his dad would check his quiet time journal every Saturday morning to make sure that he had done it for the previous week, and he wasn't allowed to go out and play and unless it would all been checked off. What would, and quite frankly, Brian, he kind of checked out on the whole concept because of that. What would you say to somebody that maybe grew up with that intense legalism, who's kind of checked out on it, but you really want to inspire them to maybe reconsider it?
One of the biggest questions I get is, how do I avoid becoming religious?
Yeah.
What they don't really mean religious. They mean, how do I avoid becoming legalistic?
Yeah.
I think it's possibly, it tends to be Christians who ask that question.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I do a lot of work in prisons. We did a lot of work on the street in Ibiza in Spain. Those people, when someone comes fresh to the gospel, they don't say, how do I avoid becoming religious? They just like, how do I know Jesus?
Yes. Yes.
I think we're kind of scarred a bit from our religious history.
Yeah.
But religion, the actual word means a devotion to a deity. So I am religious. I'm devoted to the God of God, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. So I am.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it is remembering what it's about, and I guess for me, if it's a relational connection, it's not a religious connection. And how do you sustain your faith if all you're going to do is that the sustenance of your faith, like I've talked to you right there at the beginning about how I believe in community and believe in church and love a really good, great meeting. I'm a charismatic, you know what I mean? So I'm there, love a bit of good, all of that, but can't survive on it. Can't survive on a mountaintop. You need something that keeps us going every day. So I think I couldn't stress how much the relational aspect of it is so important above and beyond the religious. And I think that we need to believe that the relational will outweigh the religious, so that's all I can say. It's almost sometimes I think as well, I'm not saying your friend does this, but I do meet people and I think it's a kind of, listen, it's good for you, right? So last Tuesday I had breakfast. I have breakfast every day. I don't remember what it was, Jason. But it was good for me.
Yes.
And so we have, I had something yesterday morning. It was actually a banana, but it was good for me. Okay. But I don't always remember what I had for breakfast, and it's good for me. And I think when it comes to, because every time we approach a quiet time, we're looking to get a kind of like tingles and, oh, Jesus is here. And it's all, sometimes it is just good for me to kind of feed my soul with the word of God, to pray to Jesus. And it's not always like I'm sitting in some sort of haze of a glory cloud. Sometimes it's just good to just feed yourself on the word of God on a regular basis. So,
I love that. No, that does help. Brian, on the podcast, we refer to soul care. We define it this way, as it's tending to the garden of your inner life. And when I think about gardening, there are many days when I'm watering and I don't see any change in the plants. But then there are some days when it's kind of hard going. I got to pull some weeds out. I got to maybe clip some things back that are dead. And it's just not always this flowers and sunshine kind of experience in the garden. And it's the same is true, I think, in our quiet times. You talk about in the book, though, you talk about the significance of the garden in relation to quiet times. Can you maybe unpack a little bit of what that means?
I think in Genesis 3, it talks about Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. Before the fall. I mean, it's a sad part of the Bible, actually, but it does give us an indication of the relationship that they had with the Lord before the fall. And I think it says, and they walked. So I haven't got my glasses on. So it says they walked in the cool of the day. They walked in the garden in the cool of the day. And there's a guy, the same guy that I quoted earlier, Ellicott, he said that the Hebrew would suggest that it was walking for pleasure.
Okay.
The conjugation of the Hebrew verb walking had an element within it that suggested they walked for pleasure. Okay. So you have this beautiful picture of Adam and Eve walking for pleasure with the Lord at the end of the day, at the end of the working day. And that idea, it was in a garden, is such a beautiful thing. So, and a garden means an enclosed, walled off, hidden place. Mostly Mediterranean gardens now, or the Moorish gardens. And you go to Seville, there's some really good examples, or Morocco or Tunisia. There are these kind of walled off gardens. You'll have seen them in various films. There's a fountain in the middle. It's not like our kind of garden where we've got like loads of veggies growing. It's kind of waters and trees and little place to walk around. So it was this enclosed Eden, and a Ghana is the Hebrew word. So the Ghana Eden, the enclosed garden of Eden. So we have to create our own enclosed Edens, our own places where we walk for pleasure with God, our own gardens. And so because it was a picture, it was original creation intent that God walked for pleasure with man and woman in a garden. And so I walk for pleasure with God. I mean, when I'm saying for pleasure, it's not just to kind of like make me happy. I mean, I want to walk with a friend that I can enjoy a conversation with, who will listen to me, but it's for pleasure. There's a sense of, wow, this is a beautiful thing. We walk, and it's a rested thing. It's not it's not just a list.
Right.
I travel all over the world with my role for 24/7 prayer, and I consistently and constantly meet leaders who haven't cultivated their own garden. And they sit on the edge of burnout. They're driven, and it's all about involvement, but there's no intimacy. And so I've just been reading Eugene Peterson's The Contemplative Pastor, and he talks about pastors we're about it, that pastors are about information and motivation. It's two of the languages they speak, but the primary language is the language of intimacy. And they don't speak the language of intimacy. And so intimacy for me is that sense of carving out that space, that garden where I walk, where I can look after, where I'm saying I a lot. I don't really like that. It's not really, but where God can do a bit of work, and God can do something in my heart and in my soul. When I meet leaders that have a garden, you notice something. There's a rests on them. There's an unhurriedness. There's actually quite a lot less ego. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely.
Where's your garden is a question, Jason. For me right now, this season of my life, my garden is my chair. Morning, I have a lovely comfortable chair. My children are like in their 20s, so they're gone. I've been working from home for the last 18 months, so I haven't got a lot of travel. Up in the morning, mug of coffee, Bible stuff, sit down. Oh, beautiful. It's undisturbed. So that's my garden. So it's my chair. Now your garden could be the car, the gym, the end of the day, the beginning of the day, the kitchen table, anywhere. But my plea for actually not just for leaders, but it is, find a garden, find a place where you have a regular connection, so that you don't just get fed by a crowd, or you don't just get fed by a stage, or you don't just get fed by seeing great big things happen. Jesus, the weird stuff about reading about Christ's time, when he goes away to a solitary place, is we don't know what happened. Just go to quiet time to get some good preaching notes, or say, God bless me for Sunday. He went and he communed with his Father. There are one or two insights we get into it, but he climbs up a mountain. Doesn't say what happens, but what we do know that happens after he's been up a mountain is he walks on water. So like the crowd is behind him, the storm is in front of him, but in the middle he prays. He goes up a mountain. And I think too many leaders are. Anyway, I won't get preachy. Sorry, Jason.
No, this is good. This is good, mate, because you're asking such a powerful question. It doesn't matter the location or the time, but we all must have our own garden, because at the end of the day, Brian, we can't give what we don't possess. And if there's no intimacy with God for ourselves personally, then there's not going to be that ability to be able to invite people in to intimacy with him. And I've thought to myself many times, if we are helping to lead people to follow Jesus, then I must become not an expert, but at least some sort of a person that is following Jesus intimately, so that I can share how to do that with other people. Go on. You were going to say something. I want to hear what came to your mind. No, go for it.
It's 6 o'clock in the morning here, so I'm kind of like, my brain's waking up and popping off
great.
all over the show. So sorry, Jason.
I love it.
But if you've ever been on a plane, there is that thing that says, you know, when you're doing the talk, and it says, before you put anyone else's mask on, put your own mask on first.
Yes. Yeah.
And I heard a bishop about that years ago.
Yeah.
And it really struck me. I think leaders, pastors, you know, well, even if you were just a nurse, or you're just, you know, or you're wherever, we run around and we're trying to put everybody else's masks on, help them breathe, help them connect, you know, but as a leader, that's probably our job, is to help people, you know, breathe.
Put their mask on. Yeah.
But it says, put your own mask on first. So I meet a lot of leaders that have neglected to put their own mask on first, and they are breathless.
Yeah.
You know, and it only works when we breathe in and we breathe out. You're alive when you breathe in and you breathe out. So I breathe God's presence in, and then I can breathe God's presence out. I connect with the divine. I breathe him in. I spend time with him. I read his word. I talk to him, and then I can breathe him out. But if all I do is breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, I fall over. You know, so we have a load of leaders that are activists, but I really think God is there's a call on leadership for us to be contemplative activists.
Yes.
Both. You know, so when you're talking about all those guys at the beginning that spend 3 hours in the morning and all of that, and then they were on their horse going and preaching to thousands of people, they were contemplative activists.
Yes.
And I think there's too many leaders just activists.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's got to be a real strong balance of the two. The sense of getting away and being with the Father, and then we can speak about the Father, and then we can minister and pastor to others. We can speak the language of intimacy, not just the language of motivation and information.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to put my hand up and be one of the first to put my hand up and say that I have, in years past, been so focused on what I was doing for Jesus that I failed to spend enough time just being with Jesus. And I've been guilty of that. And there's been kind of seasons, I would say, of great kind of refreshment in my time with Jesus. But then there's also been times where, quite frankly, Brian, it didn't feel like I was getting much out of it. Like it felt very dry and maybe even a little bit kind of robotic in that experience. And I would just love for you to maybe speak into that seasonal aspect of it. And is it necessary for people to kind of shake it up a little bit, change it up a little bit, if they're getting into some sort of a rut where their times aren't that intimate? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would think first, we're busy. Some of us are so busy building the kingdom. I think I say this in the book. We're so busy building the kingdom, we forget to sit at the feet of the king.
Yeah.
Got to do that.
Absolutely.
You know? Don't be so busy building the kingdom you forget to sit at the feet of the king.
Yeah.
So for me, that's really important. But there are going to come times where you're reading your Bible and it does feel dry. And I think sometimes we would say that was a crisis of faith.
Yep.
And I actually think it's a deepening of faith.
Yeah.
Sometimes when things don't work the way they used to work, God is calling us deeper. He's calling us into a deeper relationship with you. I've got some friends, they wrote a song years ago. It was I want to go deeper, but I don't know how to swim. And I kind of think, to go deeper, you don't actually need to know how to swim. You just need to know how to let go.
Yeah.
You know, might drown. So as you kind of let go, you throw yourself on the Father. So I do a thing where often I'll meet people and I say, for instance, I had a friend, and she was really struggling. And she said, I just, I'm just not connecting in my quiet time anymore. I said, well, what's your quiet time like? She said, well, I normally put on some like really popular music. I've got my message version of the Bible. It's pumping music, and I read it, and God's not there anymore. And I went, no, God's there. but maybe he's calling you deeper. And weirdly, my wife and I, we were just chatting with our friend, and we said, you know what you need? We deduced you need a study Bible.
Okay.
It was a weird. And because she's just reading the message, I love the message. It's really helpful. I gave the message out on the streets in Ibiza for years. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But we just, to go deeper. So she got this study Bible with notes and all that. And weirdly, that little tweak just took her deeper. But she thought she was having a crisis of faith. But God was just really calling her to a deeper understanding of His Word.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you feel like He's not meeting me like He used to. Sometimes there's dry seasons. Let's be honest. And we just, that's the kind of like, it's good for me.
Yeah.
You just exalt in the monotony of doing it again and again and again, right?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
God I write about C.K. Chesterton, and he talks about, God says again to the sunset, or similar to the flower, because he has not grown old, and maybe our Father is younger than we, because he exalts in monotony. So we have to learn something to keep going with it. But then there are other times where I think, if you're not finding him in that way, go look for him in another way.
Yeah. What are some ways that you would suggest, Brian? Because you mentioned something at the beginning of the conversation about your quiet time includes listening. You used the word listening. And for me, only in recent years, probably in the last 18 months to 2 years, have I really kind of taken a serious look in the whole idea of silence and centering or contemplative prayer. And that's been honestly game changer for me, Brian, where, I could barely go 20, 30 seconds before I looked down at my watch to see how much longer of silence I was trying to do. 2 minutes at the beginning. But now I have an experience of about 20 minutes of silence in the morning where I'm just listening on my garden, which is my couch. And I kind of pretend that Jesus is sitting on the couch with me. I haven't made him a cup of tea yet, Brian. I haven't gotten that weird yet. But for me, that was kind of shaking it up a little bit. Are there other ways that you've heard or experienced, shaking it up a little bit to be effective?
Yeah, I think changing the time can sometimes be a way, just because it just refreshes the time.
Yeah.
Changing the I think sometimes if you've grown up in church, I change translation of the Bible that I'm reading.
Okay. Yeah.
Because autopilot, in the beginning was the Word was with God.
Yeah.
The Word was in the beginning with God, all things were made by him,
Yeah.
and he was made. I know that. So when I read that, it's kind of like I autopilot. But if I read it in the English Standard Version, it's slightly different, and it just kind of jumps out. So I'm a big advocate for trying out new translations, because I think God, things pop out. And I'm also about moving the time around. I think that's good. But I'm also just, for me, journaling's been a really good thing. Sometimes I have done it more than others, but so I love journaling. But I've also known, like, we introduced in our 24/7 prayer, once a month everybody has to take a retreat day.
Okay.
8 hours of your, we pay, it's just like as part of your contract, 8 hours of your, you just have to go away, and we can give you some guided stuff, but basically the day is set aside to pray. Now we work for 24/7 prayer, so if we weren't giving our people time to pray, it would seem a bit weird. If you work in a retail, you can't say to your boss, "Can I have a day off for a retreat?" But there are. I like the idea that's been. I know John Mark Cohen's doing quite a lot of stuff on Sabbath, which I quite like. That whole, like, switch your phone off, put it in a box on a Friday, and don't pick it up till Friday night, all that kind of thing. I think that's those kind of practices. There's quite a lot of. I think it's a Ruth Haley Barton book. You must have read this about silence and solitude that she's just written.
Really, Invitation to Retreat.
Helpful.
Yeah.
So I think it's just being creative with how you do it. So recently I've just started writing. I was in Iona, the island of Iona, about a month ago, which is where Columba, in 600 AD came from Ireland to carry the gospel into England. And so it's a beautiful old Scottish island. Well, all islands are old, but with Columba's, there's all this stuff. And it said he used to sit in a hut every day, and he would copy the scriptures, copy the Psalms.
Really?
And so I've started handwriting the Psalms.
Wow.
I just want to try it.
Yeah.
I mean, theirs were really beautiful and artistic. 6 o'clock in the morning, mine's a bit more of a scribble.
Yeah.
So I just try, and I'm always looking for ways and inspiration to try and do it differently. So every morning I try and write a psalm out by hand, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm dreading it. Psalm 119.
Yeah.
But I think I'll break it down. Obviously.
Break it into bits. Yeah. Break it up in a little bit. You, Brian, you actually wrote an entire chapter on the importance of journaling, and actually got into some detail about doing that. You talked about in that chapter, and I found this fascinating because I've experienced this a little bit myself. You talked about being brutally honest with God. And I've experienced this, Brian, where I've been in places where I was so angry, so frustrated, perhaps with what was going on in my life. I remember one time in particular, my wife said, "Hey, we just need to go out and go for a walk." She's a very wise woman. And I remember on that walk, Brian, I'm literally so mad, so angry at God that I'm dropping F-bombs about the situation. And I actually, Brian, I snapped my glasses. I was that angry. I was so frustrated. And yet at the same time, Brian, I think there's something about the Psalms, especially David's Psalms, where he didn't hold back from his honesty. And you talked about this in the chapter. And Brian, what would you say to that person that says, hey, that level of brutal honesty is a bit dishonoring, maybe even irreverent? Because we need to have, the old phrase, we need to have a reverent fear of God. What would you say to them about that?
It's funny, you talked about your friend earlier whose dad used to read his journal.
Yes.
Every week. Well, the book, right? I sent a copy to my dad and he said, son, there's only one. He loved it. He was very touched. I dedicated to him. But He said, son, in that page about journaling, you wrote a swear word.
Yeah, he wouldn't even say it. He couldn't bring himself to say it, but you wrote the swear word in there, Brian. Yeah.
I said, this is a really month, right?
Yeah.
And we really toyed with, should we put that in the book? Should we? Because I'm not a shock jock. I don't really want to, do you know what I mean? I'm not trying to kind of
prove a point. Yeah.
But there was really something about I have an incredible fear of the Lord and an incredible reverence for Jesus. And I'm 100% in love and in awe of him. But I believe he wants me to be honest.
Yeah.
So I believe honesty before the Father is really, really important. When I come to him, I bare my soul, I bare my heart. And if my heart is broken, I can't hide it. I meet too many, we both probably meet too many leaders who have hidden stuff, and it's eaten them away.
Yeah.
And so there have been months that have just been really crap.
Yeah.
And I've written about it in my journal to God and said, this is how it is.
Yeah.
But then when you read Psalm 109, things like that, where what is it? It's like I've got it here. It says, appoints. This is David praying. Appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. May his children be fatherless and his wife. I always just picture being in a prayer meeting and a guy getting up and starting to pray that. We'd all be like, hang on a minute, hang on.
We need to get this guy some help. Yeah.
Get him away from the microphone for starters. And then second, it's like getting some help. Now, I believe there's a time and a place for that kind of brutal honesty. And I genuinely think it's in the Bible is more honest about prayer than church.
Yeah.
Those Psalms are written as really beautiful examples to us about how honest we can be with God.
Yeah. And
so I wrote that in my journal. I didn't preach that on a Sunday morning and I didn't pray that in front of a group of students.
Yes.
I wrote it in my journal, but I was trying, this has been the problem, not the problem, the challenge of the book is we need more leaders to be honest about their devotional life. So I really decided that, we can be brutally honest and without being irreverent. If it's just an expletive laden kind of, because you're bad at your grammar and you can't think of other words, then smarten up your imagination. But there are moments where there's some of the visceral things that we feel as individuals, some of the pain that we feel, some of the struggle, some of the strife, some of the heartache we go through, it's going to come out in a less than articulate manner.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So that's why I think journaling is really good, because it's a space to express. Most of my journal doesn't just express my pain. A lot of my journal expresses my gratitude, much more about gratitude than pain. But you have to have the space for both.
Yeah. And I think that the truth is, Brian, that our most intimate relationships are the ones where we are the most honest. I think there's a correlation between that. If I'm not being fully transparent and honest with my wife or my kids, then there's going to be a lack of intimacy in those relationships. I think the same is true in any relationship, including our relationship with the Lord. Brian, people listening to the podcast, maybe there's someone that's listening and they're going, Jason, Brian, I would like this kind of experience on a daily basis. And I've tried it. I've given it a shot. But for whatever reason, I just don't have the discipline of a regular quiet time, but I want that. Do you have any tips or tricks that you would say for that person that's listening and struggling and they want it, but they just don't necessarily have the discipline to pull it off every day? What would you say to them?
The first thing I'd say is, therefore, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
Absolutely.
Don't beat yourself up. Listen, I've just written a book on quiet times. The week of its release was so busy, I didn't have a quiet time all week.
Yeah.
How you feel?
Yeah.
You're interviews about quiet time, you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's been a really rough week. I've been like, doing all this promo on quiet times, and I haven't had one. And there's a lot of grace. We have to understand that there is grace, but I think there has also to be we're disciples, and disciples mean we have to discipline our lives. Paul talks about, beating his body into submission.
Yeah.
But under that lens of no condemnation, so it is a challenge. Grace is always a challenge. If grace doesn't give you the, if you're not asking those kind of questions, I don't know if you really fully understood grace, because you can just be like, oh, God still loves me, and he does still love you, but I love him, but I just want to get to know him. So I think for me, I talk about like an hour that I spend. If you could do 10 minutes, like the about standing by the kettle and letting it boil, you have to start building in small practices and try and look to incrementally increasing them. It's like when you go to the gym, the first time you lift some weights, you're like, there's always some big beefy guy lifting really heavy weights. When we did a lot of work in Spain, and I used to go to the gym with a load of bouncers, like big security guards.
Yeah.
And this one guy, he took me to the gym to teach me how to do it. And he said, Brian, he said, there's always going to be someone in a gym who can lift more than you.
Yeah.
And that really helpful, because there's always someone lifting, and you kind of look, and it almost puts you off, because there's someone who could, but that's not it's about, learning to do it yourself. And so there's always going to be someone who's doing more than you, but you have to start somewhere. And I can lift more in a gym now than I used to be able to lift when I first started. And I think it's starting. So I'm doing I would say, listen, 5 minutes a day. If you were to read I'm a big one on why don't you do 21 days? Get the book of John, read John, 21 chapters. Read a chapter a day. Even 30 chapters of Proverbs. Read Proverbs for a month, or actually just read one part of a thing. I'm going to read 10 verses a day. So I think it's almost being mathematical, some of it, and just right, I'm going to do this much, and then see how it increases. I think we do live in a culture of immediacy. And I believe we need to learn the art of perseverance in a culture of immediacy. And sometimes we have to learn just to persevere, to keep going, keep going. And sometimes it mightn't always, pop, but there are days when we put I talk about this, when we put quantity time in, we have quality moments, So my sons, I've got 2 sons, and I would often be like, I want to have quality time with my sons, really good conversations. But if I scheduled in an evening for quality time, they'd be like, oh, I want to play the Xbox, got a friend coming around, got my homework to do, all of that. But if I spent quantity time with them, we have quality moments. So I put quantity with my sons, and then all of a sudden you're washing the dishes on a Tuesday night, and they open up about how they're really feeling about their future, and that quality moment comes as we put in the quantity time. And so for me, it's trying to build in regular quantity and starting small, building up, mixing it up, thinking about different times of day. What is there in your life that you do right now that you could cut out? So, we spend 150 minutes on average per day on social media. It takes you 15 minutes a day to read 4 chapters of the Bible on average. If you read 4 chapters of the Bible every day, you'd read the Bible in a year. So, 150 minutes social media, 15 minutes Bible. So cut down your social media by 10% and you could read the Bible in a year. Kind of weird. But so I think there's someone once said that we value what we do and we do what we value, and it's almost like we've got to, how much value do you put on it? As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. How tasty are you? And I guess if I was praying for a leader that was struggling, I'd be saying, God, I pray that you would birth a holy thirst in this individual, that they are thirsty for you. So my prayer is that if you're dry, that God would give you a thirst that would drive you to him, So I don't know if that's
super helpful, mate. The other thing that you talked about in the book that I found really fascinating is this idea of the importance of a hidden life. And I just think, more so than ever, Brian, because of the internet and because of, social media platforms and things like that, we can have more of our life in the public domain than ever before. Like, quite frankly, Brian, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today is because somebody listens to the podcast on an internet, connection, or somebody has heard a message online that I've preached or whatever. And so I just think there's this temptation out there more so than ever to grow very large kind of platforms of influence, especially online. And I would love for you to just maybe speak into this idea of the importance of a hidden life, and maybe share some concerns or maybe warnings that you have of this idea of the large public platforms, including in our Christian culture. We have a celebrity culture even within Christendom that I think there's maybe some challenges with. So share some thoughts on that topic with us.
I could go on about this. I think announcement culture is very real. We live in a culture. People are always announce. This is what I'm doing. I went on a boat trip yesterday with my wife and her work colleagues. So there's a photo me on the boat on Insta. Do you know what I mean? And we're like, here I am on the boat. It's lovely, and it's a beautiful view, and and we're kind of like there's this announcement culture that is very real in our lives, and I think what happens then is we start promoting highlights, and even the Book of Acts, right, is a book of highlights. There were Paul got up, made a tent, went for a walk by the beach, went home, went to bed. Do you know what I mean? And Peter and John, they just prayed, they just read, they did their stuff, but it was kind of like, you just got to do your normal life, but we read the highlights. And then we look at leaders, and leaders are always kind of like announcing, not all of them, but we've got to be really careful about announcement culture. That we're announcing what we're doing. And I'm really drawn at the moment, and I know it's in the book, but I'm drawn to it right at this time. I'm drawn to 1 Kings 17, where Elijah goes into the court of Ahab and he prophesies, and that's announcement culture. And that's what most leaders want, isn't it? They want to be like speaking to kings.
Yes.
Influence and power. Or even when you read about Jesus, he goes along he healed in Mark 1, he heals Peter's mother-in-law, and it says the whole town turned up.
Wow.
Isn't that, and I'm thinking that's what, as a church leader, that's what I used
to want. Yeah.
Speak to kings, the whole town to turn up. That's what you want. But then with Elijah, verse 1, he's in a court. Verse 2, God says, now go hide yourself. Jesus has the whole town turn up. What does he do the next morning? He goes off to a solitary place and prays. To a hidden place. And so I think that, I'm trying. The reason I'm chuckling is I'm trying not to be brutal about this, because it's a bit of a bee in my bonnet.
Brian, be brutal, mate. We need to hear it, because I think it's so pervasive in our culture today. Honestly, be brutal.
This is what happens, right? Is that so? Elijah goes away and he finds God by a brook, by water, by ravens. He goes deep with God and at 1 Kings 17 is 3 years. Sometimes we read a chapter and we're like, oh, it's just a chapter. 3 years of hiddenness before God says to him, go show yourself. And I think some leaders can't do 6 weeks of hiddenness.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's so important. We live in a culture where almost like the pinnacle of leadership appears to be stage time.
Yeah.
And I've got to get stage time. If I can get on the stage, if I can get on the platform, it's platform time. That's the pinnacle of leadership. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for everyone. See, the artifacts of our faith are the bowl and the towel. The artifacts of our faith are John 13, washing one another's feet. And there are too many leaders that want their feet washed, you know, and so they want to announce it. And even that, washing feet, you know, click, it's online. Look at me washing feet. No. A servant serves when no one is watching. A servant serves when no one is watching. And so I just think we've got to be really, really careful about that, promoting that as the ideal, because then we get a load of young guys thinking, to be successful in ministry, I need to get on a platform. To be successful in ministry, I need to have 100,000 Instagram followers. You know, I need to be able to, and it's so wrong. When you look at Mother Teresa, and we all know about her, what did she do? She didn't have Insta. She didn't preach. There's a book of her letters, but she went and she served the poor. You know, Eugene Peterson, he spent like the first 60 years of his life just being a pastor of a church, serving faithfully and daily. You know, there are lots of heroes of our faith that weren't super popular in their day, but we sometimes get drawn to the glamorous. Honestly, it's crazy, because it's promoting an aesthetic leadership that's about how we look more than what we're doing. You know, so it almost becomes like you have to be in a significant place and be a significant person. I even get worried, Jason, about like the idea that's prevalent within church culture that you're only really going to see revival if you hit the major cities. Wow. You know, so it's like, no, but when you think about it, it's quite important, isn't it? Like everyone's got need to be in New York, need to be in London, need to be in Sydney, need to, you know, it's the big cities. And if I'm honest, it's quite scary when you think, where did Jesus come from? You know, from Nazareth, you know, and was Jerusalem the center of the world at the time? No, it wasn't. Rome was. And so it's quite fascinating that we've somehow adopted a kind of a city theology, that you've got to go to cities, you know, or also I think there's quite a lot of leaders that are they're not enamored with place, they're enamored with leadership. So they'll move around quite a lot, you know, and someone will offer them a job leading a church. Yes. Well, I want to see more leaders fall in love with a geographical location and think, this is where God has called me, like Teresa of Calcutta. That's how she's known. Teresa of Calcutta. Imagine being, you know, Jason of Brisbane. You know what I mean? Your passion, your heart for the place and bringing the kingdom in the place is greater than your passion and your heart for your status and being a leader. So these are little nervous things. I have loads of really good friends who lead churches in London, New York, Sydney, and all sorts of places. I'm not knocking it, but I think if it's all about that, it's quite scary. Yeah. So I live in Norfolk, a little part of England, and it's hidden. You know, and God, you know, when I look at some of the bigger bands, as my friends in this band, Delirious, right? Yeah. It's a small town called Littlehampton. No one's heard of Littlehampton. No one's heard of it. You know, it's a rural seaside town in the south coast of England, and God used them in a massive way. So I just think we've got to be really careful. We don't think it's all about platform or all about place. You know, I mean place as in me being in a big city. Yes. Something about having a passion for a place and a passion for, you know, a passion for the towel and the bowl. Yeah. You know, how do I serve? Yeah. How do I serve? And a servant serves when no one's watching. And I think if you were to read Elijah, you'd find that he was this up and down kind of guy, this prominent and then hidden, prominent then hidden. And, you know, and I believe that when he was in his seasons of prominence, he was speaking out of hiddenness. Yeah. You know, if you were to read John 14 as a reflection on social media use as well, Jesus's brothers say, you need to go up. I think, maybe it's John 7. Anyway, you need to go up to Jerusalem to show yourself. Yes, yes. John 6, verse 66, which is weird in itself, says that Jesus lost followers. Right. His teaching was so hard, he lost followers. I actually think that there's a lot of leaders out there, and it's all about getting followers. And Jesus wasn't frightened of losing followers because of the message that he preached and the way that he lived. And the idea of losing followers, you know, when you think about it, if my Instagram, my small little Instagram count dropped below 1,000, I'd get distressed. Yes. You know, but Jesus lost followers. So I just think we just got to be careful. We don't allow the culture to lead us. We need to lead the culture. Yeah. Brian, that was gold, by the way. I'm so glad that you were just honest about it, because I think this is one of the great tensions of leadership in our culture today, because
quite frankly, it's celebrated when we grow platforms of influence. It's what's expected sometimes nowadays as well. If you're a leader, that you would have these large platforms of influence. I love you mentioned something, and I've heard others talk about this. You mentioned something earlier in the conversation. You talked about this idea of being contemplative activists. And
Yep.
Rich Villodas, in his book, The Deeply Formed Life, he talks about this same concept. And I love in your book, you move from kind of what quiet time is all about, but then it does come into activity. It's not just the contemplative. It moves to mission and to justice and things like that. What would you say in kind of, as we're wrapping up the conversation, what would you say about that move from not just being contemplative, doing a quiet time, being in that garden with Jesus, but it has to have an outward, focus. It's got to have an outward working. What does that look like?
I think it's Bob Pierce who said, "Lord, break my heart with what breaks yours."
Yeah.
So I genuinely believe that when we spend time with the Father, we become aligned to his heart.
Yeah.
So if you get a needle and you rub it against a magnet and then you put it on top of a cork, the needle automatically points towards magnetic north. It's a weird thing, because it becomes aligned because it's rubbed against a magnet. It's been magnetized. And so when we spend time with God in the quiet time, I think he orientates us. He points us towards where his heart would be. And his heart is always towards the least, the last, and the lost.
Yeah.
So if your quiet time doesn't lead you out, then it's a therapy tool.
Yeah.
And so we breathe in, as I said earlier, but we also breathe out. And so my fear with the Quiet Time book, which is why my last chapter is on mission, or one of my chapters is on mission, is that it becomes just a therapy tool. But the reality of my faith is that I have a God who's passionately in love with the world and wants to see the world won for him. And so when I spend time with him, he gives me ideas and strategies for looking out. And if your quiet time doesn't lead you out, I would question your quiet time.
Yeah.
If it doesn't get you outwardly focused, if it doesn't turn you to look out, then that would worry me. So I think all quiet times we breathe in, but we have to breathe out. We're called to be, light in darkness, salt where there is no salt. We're called to not be hidden under a bucket or whatever, and we're called to shine brightly. But I think we do that best when we come from the deeply formed life, from the we were in Spain. We used to walk around the streets at night, really crazy place, and we'd run up to people, we'd walk up to people and say, "Hi, we're Christians, can we pray for you?" And my wife went up to a group of girls one night, and they weren't Christians, and said, "Can we pray for you?" And as they started to pray for these girls, one of the girls started to cry. And her friend said, "What are you doing, making her cry?" And the girl who was crying went, "No, it's not her, it's God in her."
Wow.
Which I think is the essence of how we should be, that if we are those people who are so connected to the Father that we can somehow carry Christ, to those around, that when we pray, they feel something that's beyond us, or, when they see us, a lot of Christians think that so I'm in like the garage getting my car fixed, and the guy starts to talk to me about his depression. And people don't talk about their depression to everyone.
No.
They see something on you. I don't know him. We end up chatting about it, and, talking, and, able to pray for him. It's kind of like, it's because people see something of the mark of the Father. People know who you've been with. People know, honestly, they know who you've been with.
Yeah.
I believe the scent of the Lord lingers on. Paul talks, to some we are the aroma of life, to others we are the stench of death.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about people who, when someone's been with Jesus. They said of the disciples, they took note that these men had been with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so there is something of that if we develop that quiet time well, it's not just purely therapeutic, but we start to think about that it should always lead me out. Then I think it's very healthy. I think it's unhealthy if it just becomes insular.
Yeah,
Most
absolutely.
most of the stuff that you read about, like that we read about these great men and women of the faith, and we kind of think they were locked away. I went to Enniskillen in Ireland, and there was this island, and they said this is where the monks lived, and I was like, weird, locking themselves away on an island. And they went, no, it's because all the major trade routes at the time traveled by water, and all the boats would stop off, so they positioned themselves in a space that was for mission. But when we
Wow.
go now, it's just a little island in the Fermanagh Lakes in the middle of nowhere. And so it looks weird. And we get this impression that the monastic, the prayerful life was reclusive. But the reality, apart from the Desert Fathers, but the reality is that most monasteries were built in a place whereby they could influence the culture, with food and creativity and all of that. So I think that we're called to this kind of monastic prayerful life, but we must also be influencers of culture.
Yeah. I love that, Brian. They put themselves in a position of mission. They place themselves there. I think that's fantastic. Mate, this has been such a great conversation. And I've just got a couple of questions I want to wrap up with. The first one is this. The theme of the podcast, mate, super simple. We want to help leaders, help people reach their goals without losing their souls. And I'm really convinced that the goal is actually your healthy soul. That's really the goal. So what does that look like for you beyond just quiet time? Do you have some practices? Do you do some things that cultivate that healthy soul for you?
Yeah, I do.
What do they look like?
I have friends.
Yeah.
Real friends. That helps. I have people I can be real with. They're not just leaders. They're, I've normal everyday friends. I've got, my friend lives around the corner, and we go out together, we spend time together. So I think friendship is very helpful. I think a lot of leaders somehow can get a bit isolated, and developing deep friendships and good relationships, and not to be frightened to form. And even if you're leading a church, if you know, can't form, relationships with congregants, I think that's nonsense. I think you be friend with everybody, but develop friendships. That's one of the ways. Exercise. So, I've recently had a knee injury. Okay. So I've been struggling a bit of exercise, and I've realized I felt a little bit, maybe a little bit low. And actually I was saying to my wife yesterday, just need to get back on the exercise bike. So during lockdown, I cycled on my exercise bike 10 miles a day, So wow. Weirdly, so friendship, these sound weird, don't they? Exercise, spiritual, good diet, so I like a glass of wine, but I try not to drink wine during the week. So a glass of wine at the weekend. Not that I drink loads, but I'm just saying, just kind of you try and watch yourself. I look at my habits. What am I doing? When I travel a lot, I'll eat too much chocolate because I feel a little bit low and I'm getting little quick sugar hits. So I've worked that one out and try and eat some fruit, which is. It's almost like physical care. I was when you asked me that question. I've got this book here. I've got this really. I like. I think more. I was quite impressed as well by Eugene Peterson. He said that more leaders need to read poetry.
Okay.
If the Bible is full of poetry, why aren't we more into poetry? The thing about poetry is you can't read it fast.
Right. It forces you to slow down and contemplate.
And so, but I think that would be my one weird one is to start reading. But I was reading this. I got this beautiful book. It's called Benedictus, a book of books by John O'Donoghue. Beautiful book. But he says this beautiful line in here. One of his poems is for one who is exhausted. And there's a big long poem, but you can probably look this up, guys. But it's draw alongside the silence of stone until its calmness can claim you. Be excessively gentle with yourself. Be excessively gentle with yourself. And I think we need to learn to be gentle with ourselves as leaders. We often beat ourselves up. What the voice in our head is often, you need to do more, you need to do more, you need to do more. That wasn't good enough. You could do that better. The good is the enemy of the best, all that kind of stuff. And that all kind of creeps in, and we're never quite happy enough. And so we need to learn to be incredibly gentle with ourselves. And I think if more leaders were gentle with themselves, they'd be gentle with others. So, yeah.
It's almost like we spend our lives always striving for more that we forget to actually live this life. Exactly. Because we're so much involved in striving. So good, mate. Thank you for sharing that, Brian. Even if nobody on the podcast is encouraged by that, I needed to hear that today. Hey, what's happening, mate, in the world of 24/7 prayer right now? Are you guys working on some projects, which, by the way, Lectio 365 app, I am a huge fan, and I talk about it everywhere I go. I try to get as many people on board with it because it's been such a helpful tool for my own soul care. So thank you guys for that. But any projects you guys are working on, and how can people keep up with you?
Well, people can follow me on Instagram.
Yeah, that's right. We got to build the platform.
Yeah, come and follow me on Instagram.
Yeah.
And Twitter and Facebook and all your usual social media formats. I'm sure you can track me down.
Yeah.
I think we Lectio 365 has been a real blessing. We really wanted to make that a tool to help people encounter God through prayer and through the Word of God. We've actually just released this week Lectio for Families.
Oh, really? Okay.
A lot of people saying, "Oh, I'm doing this for my children." Sometimes the content's a little, it's certain. So we've just made a new app called Lectio for Families, which is really, check it out. So I think it's on Apple and Google stores. That's literally last week.
Okay.
We're doing a series called the Be Still series.
Yes,
So
I saw some of the videos that you guys were shooting. Yep.
247prayer.com/be still. Anyway, we're talking to literate generation here.
Yeah.
So it's the Be Still course, which we put together really to complement the book, to help small groups and churches to do. It's like 5 sections that you can work through. It's got study guides, so people can kind of like, it's like 12-15 minutes, that kind of stuff long, and then a study guide for some discussion around quiet times. So we're really going to go with the Be Still course. That's a big thing for 24/7 prayer. Lectio for Families is the really big thing for 24/7 prayer as well, and the ongoing Lectio 365 stuff. It's just, I think, Jace, if you could pray for our team, because the good thing about it is fresh content.
Yes.
And so you can have an app, but it's getting the content that's important. So we have to really hard on content as well. So that's kind of keeping us busy right now. I think as well, international travel's opening up, so I'm personally going to be traveling a wee bit more, but that's exciting.
Super exciting. Well, mate, this has been a pleasure. I mean it. It's been refreshing for my soul, and I'm so grateful that you carved out the time to have the conversation. And I hope it's a blessing to those people that are listening, and I hope it honestly spurs people on to find their own garden, to find their own quiet time, and just be still with the Lord. So thanks, mate, for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've really appreciated it. And it's been great to catch up, Jason. Thank you.
Well, that was such a powerful and challenging conversation for me personally. I'm so thankful that Brian was brutally honest about the importance of servant leadership. I especially was challenged by his thoughts about our desire as leaders for platform time, and the fact that Jesus modeled leadership by using a bowl and a towel to wash people's feet. Brian said real leadership is serving when no one is watching, and that is incredibly powerful. Hey, before I go, I want to make sure you don't miss any conversations like this one, especially if you're brand new to the podcast. If you haven't already done so, I want to invite you to go over to my website, jasonperkoperkins.com, and you can sign up for our email there. We just simply send out emails when we release podcasts, and also helpful resources for people who are wanting to both reach their goals but also at the same time not lose their soul. Promise we won't inundate you with emails every day. We just want to send you helpful information to make it available to you. Another great way to not miss a single episode and conversation like this one is just to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you listen to this episode on today. Hey, I want to give you some feedback around a tool that I've been talking a lot about recently on the podcast. It's called The Working Genius. It comes from Patrick Lencioni and the Table Group. It's a phenomenal resource for teams, and we talked about it over the last couple of episodes a couple of times, and a number of teams have actually reached out to me and had me take their team through the Working Genius assessment and also the workshop that goes along with that. And I wanted to let you know some feedback that we got from one of the leaders who invited me to come and lead their team through the assessment and workshop. Greg Pierce, he said this, that before discovering the Working Genius tool, our team was a bit unstructured in our approach to workplace productivity and team meetings. He went on to say, having Perko guide and facilitate the Working Genius workshop made it easy for everyone on our team to identify their own productivity strengths and how they can use this to contribute to the overall workplace. Since going through the Working Genius with our team, it has helped us to not only have common language around workplace productivity, but also to better structure our team meetings to be more focused and productive. Greg, thanks for letting us know how the Working Genius was helpful for your team and the difference that it's made. And I want to invite you, if you work with a team, maybe you're a leader in an organization or a part of a team in a workplace somewhere, and you would like more information about the Working Genius, or maybe even you'd like to have me come and lead your team through the assessment or workshop, I'd love to be able to do that. The best way to reach out to me and let me know if you're interested is go to my Instagram bio. It's at Jason Perko Perkins on Instagram. You can click on the link in my bio, and there's a way to connect with me there specifically about the Working Genius workshops. I'd love to help you and your team discover what Greg and his team discovered about productivity in the workplace and how you guys can reach your goals as a team without losing your souls. As always, I love hearing from people that are finding the conversations helpful in feeding their souls. That's what this podcast is all about. We want to help people reach their goals without losing their soul. So I'd love to hear from you this week if it's been helpful for you. The best way to do that, again, is via Instagram. My handle is at Jason Perko Perkins. Also, if you're finding these conversations helpful, we'd love it if you would share it with other people that you think would find them helpful as well. A great way to do that is through social media, but another way to do that to help us get the word out about the conversations is to leave us a rating and a review on your preferred podcast platform. I'd so appreciate it if you'd take the time to do that. All of those things help us to get these great conversations to as many people as possible. Our dream here at the podcast is super simple. We want to see an entire generation of leaders reach their goals and at the same time hear them say, "It is well with my soul." Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to connecting with you online this week, and I can't wait to share a holiday episode with you next week where we can care for our souls even during this busy time of the year and spend time being with Jesus. Until then, cheers.